Okay, so imagine this. You've got 6 guys, and they decide to cross the Pacific Ocean.
On a raft.
Yeah, basically a raft.
Right.
It's just made of balsa wood logs tied together with rope.
Wow.
No metal, no fancy technology, really, just those logs and the ropes, and thousands of miles of open ocean.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah. And you know what? That's exactly what happened back in 1947.
Really?
With the Kon-tiki expedition.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
Led by this Norwegian explorer named Thor Heyerdahl.
Okay.
So today we are diving deep into this wild adventure.
Awesome.
Using the Wikipedia page on the Kon-tiki expedition as our main source.
Great source.
Our mission here is to figure out what drove Heyerdahl and his crew.
Yeah, what made them do it?
Like to really get the sheer craziness of what they pulled off.
Right.
And to understand the kind of impact it had.
Yeah,
how it
changed things.
Even all the scientific back and forth it started.
Debates.
Yeah, exactly. So even the name Kon-tiki is super interesting.
Oh, how?
Well, it's actually connected to this major Inca god Viracocha.
I see.
And Kon-tiki is thought to be an older name for him.
Oh, wow.
So it's not just a cool name, you know?
Right.
It really gets at the heart of Heyerdahl's theory.
Oh, which was?
That people from South America could reach Polynesia way before Columbus.
Just by drifting along with the ocean currents?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
Now, Heyerdahl wasn't just some armchair theorist.
Oh, so he actually...
He wanted to prove his idea wasn't totally nuts.
Okay, how?
By doing the voyage himself.
Wow.
He was adamant about using only materials and methods that would have been around back then in ancient South America.
To make it authentic?
Totally. It was a journey that kind of went against what everyone thought at the time.
It must seem crazy to a lot of people.
Oh, yeah. They left from Callao in Peru.
Okay.
On April 28th, 1947.
All right.
And they spent a whopping 101 days at sea, just drifting across the Pacific.
That's a long time.
It's over 3 months.
Oh.
They covered something like 6,900 kilometers.
Wow.
Or about 4,300 miles before their raft finally hit a reef.
Oh, no.
And ended up beached on Raroya Atoll.
Okay.
In the Tuamotu Islands on August 7th.
So they made it.
They did, and all 6 crew members survived this crazy journey.
That's amazing.
It really is a testament to just how tough they were and maybe a little bit of luck.
Yeah, I bet.
Considering the raft was really basic.
So let's hear about these adventurers.
Okay, so leading the pack was Thor Heyerdahl.
Okay, the man with the theory.
Yeah, and he actually wrote a best-selling book about the whole thing.
Oh, cool.
Their navigator and the artist on board was Eric Hesselberg.
Oh, wow. A multi-talented guy.
Yeah, he's the one who painted that iconic Kon-tiki figure on their sail.
I've seen that image.
Then there was Bengt Danielson, the only Swede on the crew.
Okay.
He was a steward, so he managed all their food and water.
Important job.
Oh, yeah, and he was the only one who spoke Spanish, so he was their translator.
That must have been crucial.
Absolutely, for talking to people at the start, and, you know, they met anyone along the way. Okay, then we've got a couple of Norwegians, Knut Haugland and Torstein Raby, both radio experts.
Very important for communication.
You bet they both had served in the Norwegian resistance during World War II.
Wow, so they had some serious skills.
Yeah, Haugland was actually decorated for his part in the heavy water sabotage.
I've heard of that operation.
Yeah, pretty intense stuff.
So they had their communications covered.
And rounding out the crew was Herman Watzinger, an engineer.
Okay.
He was responsible for all the scientific measurements and data collection throughout the whole voyage.
Someone had to keep track of all that.
Right, and we can't forget Gerd Vold-Hum.
Okay.
She was like the organizer back on land.
Ah, the unsung hero.
Yeah, she made sure everything ran smoothly from that end.
Very important.
And then there was Larita the parrot.
Ah, I'm a mascot.
Sadly, she didn't make it.
Oh, no.
But anyway, about the raft itself.
Yeah, what was it like?
This thing was nothing like a modern boat.
I can imagine.
It was made from 9 huge balsa tree trunks, some of them almost 45 feet long.
Wow, that's huge.
Yeah, they lashed those logs together with just hemp ropes.
Really?
No metal at all in the main structure.
Wow.
No nails, no screws, nothing.
Like the ancients.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They wanted to show what could be done with what the ancient South Americans would had.
Fascinating.
Now, to keep this thing stable in the water, they used balsa log cross pieces.
Okay, like supports.
Yeah, each one about 5.5 meters long and 30 centimeters in diameter.
Wow.
And they were spaced about 91 centimeters apart.
So like giant sideways beams.
Yeah, and they even put pine splashboards at the front to deflect waves.
Smart.
And use lengths of pine as centerboards.
Okay, so those would help them steer.
Well, they'd offer some resistance to sideways drift, you know, help keep them on a straighter course.
Makes sense.
Now, their shelter on this raft was pretty interesting, too.
Oh, how so?
They made an A-frame mast out of mangrove wood, about 8.8 meters tall.
Okay.
And behind that, they built this little cabin from woven bamboo.
Wow.
It was only like 4.3 meters long and 2.4 meters wide.
That's tiny.
I know. And the roof was thatched with banana leaves.
Oh.
Can you imagine spending over 3 months in that little space?
Out on the open ocean.
Exposed to the sun, the wind, the rain.
That's wild.
To steer, they had this massive oar.
How massive.
Almost 6 meters long, made of mangrove wood with a fir blade.
Wow.
Their mainsail was pretty big, too.
How big?
4.6 by 5.5 meters, made of cotton, and it was hoisted on a bamboo yard.
Interesting.
And from pictures, we can see they had a smaller topsail.
Okay.
And even a mizzen sail at the back for finer adjustments.
So they had some control.
Yeah, the partial decking was made from split bamboo, and the main spars were laminated.
Laminated.
Heyerdahl actually spent a lot of time trying to find the perfect combination of strength and flexibility for those spars.
So it was more than just slapping some wood together.
Oh, well, yeah, they were serious about using only materials and techniques from that time period.
Really dedicated.
Totally.
So they built this raft, right?
They did.
They got their crew.
Yep.
They had supply. What about communication? How did they stay in touch?
Well, water was the most important thing.
Of course.
They carried 1040 liters of drinking water,
Wow.
stored in 56 cans,
Okay.
and some sealed bamboo rods.
Bamboo rods.
To see if those ancient methods of storing water in bamboo actually worked.
Interesting.
For food, they had a mix of stuff they brought with them and things they hoped to find along the way.
Okay. Like what?
They had 200 coconuts,
Okay.
sweet potatoes, bottle gourds, other fruits and roots.
Makes sense.
But they also had field rations and canned food from the U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps.
Really?
Yeah, in exchange for the food, they agreed to report back on how well it held up during a long sea voyage.
Practical.
And they were actually pretty successful at fishing.
Oh, yeah.
They caught all kinds of stuff. Flying fish, mahi-mahi.
Mahi-mahi.
Yeah, yellowfin tuna bonito, even sharks.
Wow.
That fresh protein must have been a welcome change.
I bet it kept them going.
And here's a fun fact.
Okay.
Each crew member had a watertight Eterna sports wristwatch.
Right.
And later, Eterna actually named their line of sports watches Kon-tiki
Oh, cool.
after the expedition.
Good marketing.
Now, for communication, remember, this was way before satellites.
Right.
So they had an amateur radio station
Okay.
with the call sign LI2B.
Got it.
And it was operated by Kon Hogland and Torstein Raby.
The radio experts.
Right, those guys from the Norwegian resistance.
Makes sense.
Their radio skills were super important on this trip.
Oh, definitely.
They managed to talk to different amateur radio stations in North and South America pretty regularly.
Okay.
And those stations would then pass along their position and updates to the Norwegian embassy in Washington, D.C.
Keeping everyone informed.
And get this, just 2 days before they reached land,
Okay.
Hogland actually got in touch with the station all the way in Oslo, Norway,
No way.
16,000 kilometers away.
Wow.
That's incredible with the technology they had back then.
Really impressive.
It just shows how skilled they were
Absolutely.
and how much you could do with even basic radio equipment.
So what kind of equipment did they have?
Well, their transmitters were powered by batteries and a hand-cranked generator.
Yeah.
They worked on various shortwave bands.
Right.
They were designed to be water resistant.
Important on a raft.
Very. And they had a surprisingly low power output,
How low?
about 6 watts,
That's not much.
like a really dim light bulb.
Wow.
They also had a couple of backup British transmitters, a VHF transmitter for talking to planes if they needed to,
Okay.
and a hand-cranked survival radio, the Gibson Girl type, for emergencies.
They were prepared.
Oh, yeah. And there's some great stories about their radio gear.
Like what?
Well, their main receiver, a National NC-173, got soaked when they crashed on the reef.
Oh, no.
But they managed to dry it out and get it working again.
That's lucky.
At one point, they were worried that going silent for too long might trigger a huge rescue mission.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So they used their emergency transmitter to send a quick all well message.
Just to let people know.
Yeah, apparently just in time.
Oh.
And it's cool that Heyerdahl used that same LI2B call sign for his later RAR expeditions across the Atlantic.
So it became kind of symbolic.
Yeah, I guess
So they had the raft, the crew, the supplies, the communication. What was the actual voyage like?
Okay, so they set off from Callao in Peru
Okay.
in the afternoon on April 28th, 1947,
Right.
to get them away from all the ships near the coast.
Yeah.
The Peruvian Navy tug Guardian Rios towed the Kon-tiki about 80 kilometers out into the Pacific.
Okay.
And once they were far enough out,
You were on their own.
they let go of the tow line and started drifting west with the Humboldt Current.
That was their ride.
Yeah, that current was like their highway across the Pacific.
It makes sense.
But even with the current, they faced some scary moments.
Oh, I bet what happened.
Heyerdahl talks about this terrifying experience on July 2nd
Okay.
with what he called the Three Sister Rogue Waves.
Rogue waves.
Yeah, he described this huge wave appearing out of nowhere
Oh, wow.
on a pretty calm sea, and then two more giant waves came right after it.
Ow.
The Kon-tiki was tossed around, completely submerged,
Here.
and then just as suddenly as they came, the waves are gone.
And the sea was calm again?
Yeah, it must have been terrifying.
Nature can be pretty powerful.
That's for sure.
So when did they first see land?
Well, they spotted Puka Puka Atoll on July 30th.
Okay.
Then on August 4th, their 97th day at sea,
All right.
they reached Angatau Atoll.
Ooh.
They even saw some locals who paddled out to the raft in canoes,
Wow.
but they couldn't find a safe place to land because of all the reefs.
Oh, that's too bad.
Now, reaching Angatau on that 97th day was significant
Why is that?
because Heyerdahl had figured that was the absolute shortest time it would take to reach the Tuamotu Islands.
I see.
So even though they couldn't land, it proved that they were on track
Yeah.
with his calculations about the currents and how fast they'd drift.
Interesting.
And then came the end of their epic voyage.
What happened?
On August 7th, after 101 days at sea,
Wow.
and after traveling about 6,980 kilometers,
That's amazing.
the Kon-tiki hit a reef and was washed ashore onto this uninhabited islet
Okay.
just off Roroya Atoll in the Tuamotus.
They made it.
Their average speed for the whole trip was only about 1.5 knots.
That's pretty slow.
Yeah, but they made it.
So what happened next?
They spent a few days on that little islet, and then they were spotted by people from a nearby island
Okay.
who had seen pieces of the raft washing up.
Makes sense.
So they came out in canoes and took the crew back to their village on Roroya.
Oh.
And they got a traditional Polynesian welcome
Oh, wow.
with dances and celebrations and everything.
That's amazing.
What a way to end such a crazy journey.
I bet they were exhausted but happy.
Definitely. And they were eventually taken to Tahiti
Okay.
by a French schooner called the Tamura,
All right.
which actually towed the remains of the Kon-tiki with them.
So the raft survived too.
In a way,
Yeah.
the journey was over.
Yeah, but the story wasn't.
That's right. Now we get into the anthropological side of things.
Right. Heyerdahl's whole tiki people theory. Yeah. What was that all about?
He believed that Polynesia was first settled by these sun-worshipping, fair-skinned people
Oh,
who
good.
migrated from South America ages ago.
Interesting.
He thought these tiki people looked different from later Polynesians.
How so?
He thought they were Caucasian,
Yeah.
maybe with lighter hair and skin,
Okay.
maybe taller and with beards.
Interesting idea.
He even thought they might have come from the Middle East originally,
Wow.
crossed the Atlantic, settled in Mesoamerica,
Okay.
and then one group went to Tiahuanaco in South America,
Okay.
became the ruling class of the Inca Empire,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually sailed across the Pacific.
Led by someone called Kon-tiki Viracocha.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a pretty detailed theory.
It is. And he also pointed to those giant statues on Easter Island.
The Moai,
He thought they looked more like sculptures from Peru.
then Polynesian carvings.
Yeah, and he'd interpreted the Easter Island story about the Hano Epe and the Hano
Well, the
Momola.
long-eared and short-eared people.
Yeah, as a historical conflict between these tiki people and a later wave of Native Americans who he thought came from the northwest coast of North America.
Wow.
But, and this is super important to understand,
Okay.
most scientists reject Heyerdahl's theory.
They don't believe it.
Yeah, they don't buy the whole idea of a separate white race reaching Polynesia before the Polynesians we know today.
I see.
And this rejection was pretty widespread even before the Kon-tiki set sail.
So his ideas were controversial from the start.
Totally.
So what do scientists think then?
Well, the generally accepted idea is based on a ton of linguistic, archaeological, and genetic evidence.
Okay.
And it says that the Polynesians came from islands Southeast Asia
Okay.
through this process called the Austronesian expansion.
What's that?
Basically, it's the spread of people who spoke Austronesian languages.
I see.
And these people were amazing navigators.
Really?
They built these sophisticated outrigger canoes
Wow.
and developed really complex wayfinding techniques.
So they could explore and settle the vast Pacific?
Yeah, exactly.
That makes a lot more sense.
Now, there is some evidence
Okay.
that Polynesians might have had some limited contact with South America before Europeans arrived.
Like what kind of evidence?
Oh, the sweet potato, for example.
Okay.
It's found in both regions before European contact.
So they could have traded.
Yeah, but most scientists believe that if there was any contact,
Okay.
it was more likely that Polynesian voyagers reached South America.
Not the other way around.
Right. Not a huge migration from South America to Polynesia.
That makes sense.
And to really prove this point, the voyage of the Hukulia in 1976 is super important.
Oh, tell me about that.
This was a replica of a traditional Polynesian voyaging canoe,
Okay.
a double-hulled one,
Okay.
and it sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti.
Okay.
But here's the thing.
What?
It sailed against the prevailing winds,
Wow.
using only traditional Polynesian navigation methods.
No modern instruments.
Nope.
Wow.
This totally contradicted Heyerdahl's idea.
That Polynesian canoes couldn't sail against the wind.
Exactly.
That must have been a big deal.
Oh, yeah. And the Hukulia's success
Okay.
and all its later voyages,
Yeah.
they sailed all over the Pacific
Wow.
and even circumnavigated the globe between 2014 and 2017.
No way.
This really cemented our understanding of how skilled the early Polynesians were at navigation.
Absolutely.
And about that Hanau Ipi story on Easter Island,
Yeah.
most historians and archaeologists now think it's either a myth
Okay.
or a memory of some internal conflicts within Easter Island society.
Not a South American connection.
Exactly.
So even though Heyerdahl's main theory isn't widely accepted,
Yeah.
the Kon-tiki expedition was still an amazing feat.
Oh, absolutely. A testament to human spirit and ingenuity.
And it inspired a lot of people.
Definitely, there were a bunch of later attempts to recreate the voyage or build on it.
Cool. Give me some examples.
Okay, well, William Willis did an even longer solo raft voyage in 1954
Okay.
on a raft called the Seven Little Sisters.
Wow.
Then there was Edward Ingris,
Okay.
his Contuta expeditions.
What happened there?
Well, his first attempt in 1957 failed,
Okay.
but his second try in 1959,
Okay.
he actually crossed the Pacific on a balsa raft.
Cool.
But then there were the Tahiti Nui expeditions, led by Eric de Bishop.
What about those?
He tried to sail east from Tahiti to Chile.
On a raft?
Yeah, a traditional raft.
Wow.
But his first raft was badly damaged.
Wow.
And on his second attempt in 1958,
Yeah.
he died when his raft wrecked near the Cook Islands.
Oh, that's terrible.
Sailing east was much harder
Why?
because they were going against the winds and currents.
That makes sense.
Then there was Carlos Caraveto's Tangaroa expedition in 1965.
Okay.
His raft was the only one to successfully navigate the Tuamotu archipelago
Wow.
using only sail power.
That's impressive.
Yeah, those islands are tricky.
I bet.
And then there was the 1973 Las Balsas expedition.
Okay, what was special about that one?
That one had multiple rafts sailing together,
Oh, wow.
and it holds the record for the longest raft voyage ever.
That's amazing.
More recently, in 2006, there was another Tangaroa expedition.
On their Tangaroa.
Yeah, this one was a direct recreation of the Kon-tiki voyage,
Oh, wow.
with a new balsa raft also named Tangaroa.
Cool.
This trip was actually much faster than the original.
How come?
They think it was because they use goras.
What are those?
They're these adjustable centerboards
Yeah.
made of wood that you put between the main logs.
Okay.
You can raise and lower them to help steer and reduce sideways drift.
Interesting.
Thor Heyerdahl's grandson was actually part of the crew on that one.
Oh, wow.
And then there was the Kon-tiki expedition in 2011.
Okay.
They crossed the Atlantic on a balsa raft,
Wow.
and the Kon-tiki 2 expedition in 2015 and 2016.
Okay.
They tried to do a round trip from South America to Easter Island and back.
Ambitious.
They reached Easter Island,
Okay.
but they had to abandon the return trip.
Oh,
It
no.
was just too challenging.
Yeah, these expeditions really show how much people were inspired by Heyerdahl.
And how dangerous these raft journeys can be. But the Kon-tiki's impact
Mhm.
goes way beyond just these physical reenactments.
How so?
It became a cultural phenomenon.
Really?
Heyerdahl's book, The Kon-tiki Expedition, By Raft Across the South Seas,
Yeah.
became a huge bestseller.
Wow.
It was translated into tons of languages,
Cool.
and it inspired millions of people.
What about the documentary?
Oh yeah, the 1950 documentary about the expedition won an Academy Award.
Wow.
Best documentary feature.
So everyone saw it.
Pretty much. And there's even some rare color footage from the expedition.
Oh, wow.
And in 2012, a Norwegian movie, also called Kon-tiki, came out.
I have seen that one.
It was a dramatized version of the story.
Cool.
It was nominated for an Oscar, too.
So the story still resonates with people.
Yeah, and it's even popped up in all sorts of unexpected places.
Like where?
The TV show Curb Your Enthusiasm,
Really?
the sci-fi series For All Mankind,
Okay.
the band Cotton Mather even made an album inspired by it.
Wow.
And there's a Monty Python sketch and a song by the German pop group Genghis Khan.
That's wild.
It's everywhere.
The story has really captured people's imaginations.
And if you want to see the actual Kon-tiki raft,
The real one?
it's on display at the Kon-tiki Museum in Oslo, Norway.
Cool.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the Kon-tiki expedition,
Yeah.
it's important to remember what this whole thing means.
Okay.
Yeah? While Heyerdahl's theory about how Polynesia was settled isn't really accepted by scientists,
Right.
the expedition itself is still a remarkable example of human curiosity and bravery.
Definitely.
And it shows what you can do with even simple technology.
When you use it creatively.
Exactly. It was a real-life experiment on a huge scale.
Yeah.
And even though it didn't prove Heyerdahl's theory,
Okay.
it definitely pushed the boundaries of what people thought was possible.
In terms of ancient seafaring.
Yeah, it helped us understand more about what those ancient boats could do.
And it's clear that people are still fascinated by the Kon-tiki.
Definitely.
The book, the movies, the attempts to recreate the voyage.
All of it.
It shows how powerful this story is.
It makes you think
About what?
about how sometimes just going on a crazy adventure like that,
Yeah.
whether your initial idea is right or wrong,
Right.
can lead to unexpected discoveries
Okay.
and challenge what we think we know.
And that's a good thing, right?
I think so. It makes you wonder what modern Kon-tiki style adventures are happening right now.
Yeah.
What crazy expeditions or challenges to accepted ideas are pushing the boundaries of our understanding in new ways.
That's a good question.
Something to think about until our next deep dive.
I can't wait.
Me too.
See you then. Okay, bye. Okay, so you're here because you want to get smart fast, right? To
Yeah.
really grasp something without all the unnecessary details.
Yeah.
Well, you've come to the right place because today we're diving deep into the life of a real trailblazer, Walt Disney.
Yeah, and our launch pad for this deep dive is going to be the Wikipedia entry on Walt Disney. This thing is packed with info. We're going to pull out all the good stuff for you.
Right. We're going way beyond just the facts and figures here. We're going to figure out what made this guy tick, from that first creative spark all the way to Mickey Mouse. The mind-blowing animation he came up with, his magical theme parks, and the legacy he left behind that still shapes entertainment today.
Okay, so where does it all start for Walt Disney?
It starts in Chicago in 1901, but things get interesting when his family moves to a farm in Marceline, Missouri around 1906. Seems like this rural setting is what really got him drawing. There's even a cute story about young Walt earning some cash by sketching a horse for a neighbor. I can picture it. A young kid already using his skills. And it wasn't just farm animals that caught his eye. He was hooked on the cartoons and the appeal to reason newspaper. Makes you think how those early, maybe even kind of political images influenced the guy who'd go on to create those iconic characters.
That's a great point. He practiced drawing by copying those cartoons. And another interesting thing is his childhood obsession with trains, living near the railway in Marceline, must have had an impact. You see it pop up later in his work, right? Think about the Disneyland Railroad.
Oh yeah, for sure. It all comes together in interesting ways. Then the family moves to Kansas City, and that opens up a whole new world for him. A friend introduces him to vaudeville and early movies. This is where things start to get really juicy for you. We see those first little seeds of his entertainment empire being planted.
It's crazy to think about the contrast between his artistic interests and his tough childhood. That paper route he shared with his brother Roy, waking up before dawn every day, that built some serious discipline and work ethic in him.
Definitely not an easy way to start the day. But he still found ways to grow as an artist, Saturday art classes, even a correspondence course in cartooning. The guy was driven. And then in high school, he becomes the cartoonist for the school paper, even drawing patriotic stuff during World War I.
Yeah, and that patriotic streak shows up in some of his later live-action films, too. But before all that, he tries to join the army, but he's too young. So he joins the Red Cross as an ambulance driver in France. But get this, he arrives after the war is already over.
So no combat, but still a huge life experience. And his artistic side never went away. He decked out his ambulance with cartoons. Some even got published in Stars and Stripes. His creativity couldn't be stopped no matter what.
Exactly. And when he gets back to Kansas City, his career path starts forming. He lands a job at the Pesman Rubin Commercial Art Studio. That's where he meets another talented artist, Steve Byworks. That partnership would change everything.
Okay, so we've got his early life down, the things that shaped him, his first art gigs. Now, how does that turn into a career? How does the magic really start for you?
Well, the first steps were a little shaky. He gets laid off from Pesman Rubin, and he and Iwerks start their own commercial art business. It doesn't last long. But then they both end up at the Kansas City Film Ad Company. That's where Disney gets his first taste of animation.
And even though he loved drawn cartoons at the film ad company, he's working with cutout animation. To give you an idea, imagine figures made of paper or cardboard with movable joints moved frame by frame. But he's curious, he's learning. He even borrows a book on animation and a camera and starts experimenting on his own time. That DIY spirit really set him up for success later on.
Absolutely. And his experiments lead him to a big realization. Cell animation, where drawings are made on transparent sheets that you can layer over backgrounds, was way better than cutout animation. But he can't convince his boss to switch things up. So what does he do? He takes another risk and starts his own thing with Fred Harmon.
And that's how Newman's Laugh-O-Grams are born. These were short, updated fairy tale cartoons made just for the local Newman Theater. It might seem small time, but it was his first real shot at making cartoons for an audience.
It was. And those shorts do pretty well, giving him the push to start the Lapogram Studio in 1921. He gets more animators on board, including iWorks again, and some other important guys like Rudolph Ising. But the money's not enough to keep the studio afloat.
So here's the thing. He had the vision, he had the talent, but business was tough. It happens to a lot of entrepreneurs. And that financial struggle is what leads him to make Alice's Wonderland a wild mix of live action and animation.
Yeah, with a young Virginia Davis as Alice. It's about 12 and a half minutes long, finished in 1923. Sadly, it comes out too late to save the studio. Laugh-O-Gram goes bankrupt. So at just 21, Disney decides to head west to Hollywood.
Hollywood, the land of dreams. Though at first he wasn't even thinking about animation. He wanted to be a live-action director. But as things go fate, and a certain Alice's Wonderland had other plans. He tries to sell the film and eventually finds a distributor in New York named Margaret J. Winkler.
Winkler was about to lose the rights to some of her cartoons and needed something new. She buys Alice's Wonderland, and here's the kicker. She gives Disney a contract for 6 more Alice comedies with options for even more. That was the lifeline he needed.
So to keep things moving, he and his brother Roy start the Disney Brothers Studio, the foundation for the whole empire. They bring Virginia Davis and her family to Hollywood, and in 1924, the one and only iWorks is back. By 1926, they've got their first official Walt Disney Studio on Hyperion Avenue. Things are starting to roll.
They are, but the relationship with Winkler's husband, Charles Mintz, who's now running distribution, gets tense. And by 1927, Disney feels like the Alice series has run its course. He wants to focus on just animated cartoons. This is where Oswald the Lucky Rabbit comes in, a new character for Universal Pictures.
Oswald, a character that came before Mickey. Disney wanted him to be peppy, alert, saucy, and venturesome. He was building on the success of the Alice comedies, but then something big happens.
Yeah, in February 1928, Disney goes to New York to try and get a better deal for the Oswald series. But Mintz throws a curveball. He offers Disney less money. And to make things worse, Mintz reveals that he secretly hired most of Disney's animators. Everyone except iWorks. And get this, Universal owned the rights to Oswald. It was a huge blow to Disney.
Losing your creation and your team, it's brutal. But as you know, this is what leads to something even bigger. With almost nothing left, he and iWorks start working on a new character, Mickey Mouse. Disney called him Mortimer at first, but his wife Lillian thought it sounded too snobby. A good call for animation history.
Totally. And while the exact story of how Mickey was born is a little fuzzy, it's thought that a pet mouse Disney had in Kansas City might have been the inspiration. iWorks did a lot to refine Mickey's look, making him easier to animate. And Disney himself was Mickey's voice in those early years. An early employee said, Ub designed Mickey's look, but Walt gave him his soul.
That's a great quote. It sums up their partnership perfectly. So Mickey pops up in 2 silent cartoons, Plain Crazy and The Gallopin' Gaucho, both in May 1928. But these silent shorts don't find a distributor. The world's moving to sound. And then comes the game changer, Steamboat Willie.
Steamboat Willie premiered later in 1928, and it changed everything. After the success of The Jazz Singer, Disney took a chance and added synchronized sound to Steamboat Willie. It became the first post-produced sound cartoon to really hit it big. It was an instant smash. This is what made Mickey Mouse a star.
Suddenly, they had more than just a character. They had a cultural phenomenon. And Disney, always thinking ahead, saw the power of music. He hired composer Carl Stalling, and that led to the Silly Symphony series, with the Skeleton Dance being the first. These cartoons were all about telling stories through music and visuals in a totally new way.
Both the Mickey Mouse cartoons and the Silly Symphonies were doing great, but Disney felt like their distributor Pat Powers wasn't giving them a fair cut. In 1930, to save some money, Disney wanted iWorks to try animation techniques that used fewer drawings. This caused some friction between the 2 old friends.
And then things with Powers get messy. He refuses to pay Disney more, and get this, He manages to sign iWorks to work for him directly. He basically steals Disney's main animator, Carl Stalling, thinking the studio can't survive without iWorks, quits too. It must have been a crazy, stressful time.
It was rough. Disney had a nervous breakdown in 1931. He blamed the pressure from Powers and all the work he was doing. He and Lillian took a break traveling to Cuba and Panama to get away. But even with all this drama, the seeds of future success were being planted.
When he gets back, they sign a new deal with Columbia Pictures to distribute the Mickey Mouse cartoons. This is a turning point. Mickey becomes a global star, and the studio starts introducing more of those lovable sidekicks, and Love Pluto in 1930, Goofy in 1932, and the one and only Donald Duck in 1934.
Right, and Disney, always pushing the limits, goes for the new full-color, 3-strip Technicolor process for the Silly Symphony cartoon Flowers and Trees in 1932. He even gets exclusive rights to use this tech until 1935. This is a massive upgrade for animation. Imagine going from the limited colors of early cartoons to the full spectrum of Technicolor.
Flowers and Trees wasn't just beautiful, it made history. It won the very first Academy Award for Best Short Subject Cartoon. And to top it off, Disney gets an honorary award for creating Mickey Mouse Talk about a comeback.
It showed how innovative and talented he was, and the hits kept coming. The Three Little Pigs in 1933 was another huge success that won an Oscar. The studio grew like crazy. They had almost 200 employees by the end of the year.
And Disney knew that there was something more than just fancy technology. He knew the power of a good story. He put together a separate story department with storyboard artists. This was revolutionary. Back then, nobody focused on planning the story and the emotion before they started animating. It took cartoons beyond silly gags and gave them real heart. It changed the whole industry.
He understood that people connect with characters and their feelings. That's what makes animation stick with you. This focus on storytelling is what kicked off the golden age of animation.
The golden age. This is when the studio was making hit after hit, but Disney had a bigger dream. He wanted to make a full-length animated movie. In 1934, they start working on Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It took 4 years.
A lot of people in Hollywood thought this was crazy. They said it would bankrupt the studio. They even called it Disney's folly. Making the first animated feature film in full color and with synchronized sound was a huge risk. It ended up costing $1.5 million, way more than they planned. It wasn't just about money, though. People didn't think audiences would sit through a whole cartoon movie. They didn't think animators could keep the characters and story interesting for that long.
Disney wanted Snow White to be realistic and emotional, so he sent his animators to the Chouinard Art Institute for training. He even brought in live animals for them to study and hired actors so they could see how people moved and expressed themselves. The attention to detail was incredible. And then there's the multiplane camera. Picture this, a camera above multiple layers of artwork, each on a separate pane of glass that can move around. This created an amazing sense of depth in the animation. It made scenes look three-dimensional.
The multiplane camera was a game changer. It made animation look way more cinematic. The Old Mill, a silly symphony that used the camera to its fullest, won an Oscar for its visuals. And even though a lot of Snow White was already animated by the time the camera was ready, Disney, the perfectionist, had them redo scenes to use it.
And all that hard work paid off. Snow White premiered in December 1937, and everyone loved it. It became the biggest movie of 1938, and by 1939, it was the highest-grossing sound film ever. Disney got another honorary Oscar, this time. A big one, with 7 little ones. It was a one-of-a-kind award.
That award showed how groundbreaking Snow White was, and the years right after it are what we call the golden age of animation. But even with all the success and awards, the studio was facing some money troubles.
After Snow White, they jumped right into making Pinocchio and Fantasia. Both came out in 1940. They're classics now, but back then they didn't do so well in theaters. World War II was starting in Europe, and that messed up international markets. By early 1941, the studio was in debt.
To deal with the money problems, Disney and his brother Roy decided to sell stock in the company for the first time in 1940. They also cut everyone's salaries. That, plus the fact that Disney was a really demanding boss, led to the big animators strike of 1941. It lasted 5 weeks and really changed the studio.
That strike must have been tough. While they were trying to figure things out, Disney went on a goodwill tour of South America. It's funny how this trip that was supposed to be about good relations also kept him away from all the drama and the not-so-great outcome of the strike.
It was a complicated situation. The strike caused a lot of bad blood between Disney and the animators, and some really talented people left the studio. The next movie, Dumbo, came out later in 1941. They made it on a tight budget, and thankfully people liked it. It probably helped the studio financially.
Then the U.S. enters World War II. Disney, seeing how talented his team was, puts together the Walt Disney Training Films unit. They made training films for the military, They also made Donald Duck cartoons to sell war bonds, and even some propaganda shorts like Der Fuhrer's Face, which, believe it or not, won an Oscar. They even made a whole movie called Victory Through Air Power.
Those war films were important, but they didn't make much money. Bambi came out in 1942, and it didn't do too well either. By 1944, the studio was in a lot of debt, about $4 million. They were in a tough spot.
But then someone important comes along, Amedeo Giannini, the chairman of the Bank of America. He believed in Disney's vision. He told his people to be patient and give Disney time to make his unique product work. That kind of support must have been crucial.
It definitely was. In the late 1940s, the studio made fewer animated shorts. There was more competition. Roy Disney suggested they try making more movies that mixed animation and live action and also focus on nature documentaries. This led to the True Life Adventures series, which started with Seal Island in 1948 and won another Oscar.
So they're adapting to the changing times, trying new things. Then, in 1950, they released Cinderella, their first full-length animated movie in 8 years. And it's a huge hit. People loved it. It felt like the Disney magic was back.
It was a big comeback for the animation team. Interestingly, Walt himself wasn't as involved in making Cinderella. He was busy with his first all-live-action movie, Treasure Island, which they filmed in Britain. This shows how the studio was starting to do more live-action projects, many with patriotic themes, because of the post-war mood.
They didn't completely abandon animation, though. They made classics like Alice in Wonderland in 1951 and Peter Pan in 1953. And around this time, Disney starts to step back from the day-to-day running of the animation department. He trusted his core team of animators, the famous 9 Old Men, to handle things.
Yeah, he still went to the important story meetings and gave his input. But he's getting more and more focused on other big ideas, especially this new kind of family entertainment, a theme park. And to have more say in how his movies were released, he started his own distribution company, Buena Vista. That ended their deal with RKO Pictures.
Disneyland. Just the name makes you think of magic. The idea came to him when he was at Griffith Park with his daughters. He wanted a clean, family-friendly place where kids and adults could have fun together. He also got inspiration from Tivoli Gardens in Copenhagen. He saw how cool, immersive-themed environments could be.
At first, he tried to get permission to build a theme park in Burbank near the studio, but there wasn't enough space. He ended up buying a huge piece of land in Anaheim, which was mostly orange groves at the time. To keep this project separate from the movie studio, he created WED Enterprises, which would later become Walt Disney Imagineering. He even used his own money to start the design and planning. He put together a team of artists, designers, and engineers who became known as Imagineers.
After getting money from ABC and other investors, construction on Disneyland began in 1954. The park opened in July 1955, and it was a huge event. They even broadcast it live on ABC. Disneyland was designed with different themed lands, all connected to Main Street USA, which was based on the main street in his hometown, Marceline, Missouri.
The themed lands, Adventureland, Frontierland, Fantasyland, and Tomorrowland, were super immersive and detailed. And the Disneyland Railroad wasn't just a ride, it connected the whole park. Even though there were some problems on opening day, Disneyland became a massive success, attracting tons of people and changing family entertainment forever.
The deal with ABC also meant that Disney had to make TV shows for them. This led to Walt Disney's Disneyland, a show that featured all sorts of Disney content, cartoons, live-action stuff behind the scenes, looks at the studio and Disneyland. And then there was the Mickey Mouse Club, a daily kids show that was super popular and sold a ton of merchandise.
Walt Disney's Disneyland was a hit, and the Mickey Mouse Club was a huge part of childhood for a whole generation. One part of the Disneyland series, the Davy Crockett miniseries, became super popular. It led to a hit song, The Ballad of Davy Crockett, and the start of Disneyland Records.
Besides all that, Disney was involved in other cool stuff, too. He was a consultant for the 1959 American National Exhibition in Moscow, showing Soviet audiences what American culture was like. He was also in charge of the opening and closing ceremonies for the 1960 Winter Olympics in Squaw Valley, California. He even invested in the Celebrity Sports Center in Denver. The guy was busy.
Even with all that, he was still making movies and TV shows. He made animated classics like Lady and the Tramp, The Beautiful Sleeping Beauty, The Charming 101 Dalmatians with its unique animation style and the fun, The Sword in the Stone. He even worked with the famous rocket scientist Wernher von Braun on the Man in Space episodes of his Disneyland TV show, explaining complicated science stuff to everyone.
And then there's Mary Poppins in 1964, a mix of live action and animation that was a huge success, even though Disney and the book's author P.L. Travers didn't always get along. In the same year, he was also busy planning CalArts, the California Institute of the Arts, a school that would train tons of future artists.
Disney also did a lot for the 1964 New York World's Fair. He created 4 big exhibits, It's a Small World, which was about global unity, great moments with Mr. Lincoln, with a really lifelike Abraham Lincoln robot carousel of progress, all about technology in American homes, and Ford's Magic Skyway, a ride through prehistory and the future.
Yeah.
What's cool is that parts of these exhibits and even whole rides were later added to Disneyland, showing how we could take something successful and make it even bigger.
He also had big plans that never happened, like the Mineral King Ski Resort and a Disney theme park in St. Louis. But then in 1965, he announced his biggest and most futuristic project, Disney World in Florida. It would have the Magic Kingdom and the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, or EPO.
EPCOT was a really important idea for him. He wanted it to be a real city of the future, a place to show off American innovation and test new technologies. It was a radical vision. In 1966, he even got a story credit on the movie El Teat Robin Crusoe USN using the fake name Retla Yensid, which is just his name backwards. And even though he wasn't healthy, he kept working on animated movies like The Jungle Book and The Happiest Millionaire.
But sadly, he was running out of time. He'd been a smoker since World War I, and in November 1966, he was diagnosed with lung cancer. Just a few weeks later, on December 15, 1966, at the age of 65, Walt Disney passed away. It's sad to think that he never got to see Disney World or EPCOT finish.
His death was a big loss for the entertainment world. The Jungle Book and The Happiest Millionaire came out after he died, making his total number of feature films 81. And even after he was gone, he won an Oscar for Winnie the Pooh and the Blustery Day, which came out in 1968.
After he died, the Disney Studios animation wasn't as good for a while until the Disney Renaissance in the late 1980s. His brother Roy took over the company, and when Walt Disney World opened in 1971, Roy dedicated it to his brother. But EPCOT didn't end up being a real experimental city. It became more like a permanent World's Fair with international culture and technology.
People still celebrate and learn about him today. The Walt Disney Family Museum opened in San Francisco in 2009. It tells the story of his life, his creative journey, and his impact. And of course, the Disney theme parks all over the world still attract millions of visitors every year. That shows how timeless his work is.
In his personal life, he married Lillian Bounds in 1925, and they had a happy marriage. They had 2 daughters, Diane and Sharon. He loved trains so much that he built a mini steam railroad in his backyard, the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad. It even had a little engine named Liddy Bell. It's those little details that make you feel connected to the guy behind all the magic.
It does. As he got older, his political views became more conservative. He switched from being a Democrat to a Republican. During the Cold War, he was accused of red baiting, saying that communists caused the 1941 animator strike. He was also one of the people who started the Motion Picture Alliance for the Preservation of American Ideals, and he even testified before HUAC, the House Un-American Activities Committee, in 1947. He named former employees he thought were communists. Some people say he was an FBI informant, but it doesn't seem like he did much.
He always seemed warm and friendly in public, but people close to him said he was actually shy, self-deprecating, and really demanding of his employees. He didn't give out much praise. It's interesting how different he was in private.
It's a complicated picture. His reputation has changed over time, and people still talk about him. Some people see Walt Disney as an American hero and a folk artist. Others see him as a symbol of American imperialism and intolerance. Some people have even accused him of being anti-Semitic because he gave Leni Riefenstahl a tour of his studio and supposedly met with members of the German-American Bund. But there's a lot of evidence that contradicts these claims. He made anti-Nazi propaganda during World War II. He donated to Jewish charities. He was named Man of the Year by B'nai B'rith. And many of his Jewish employees never said he was anti-Semitic.
People have also said he was racist because of some of the stuff in his older movies like Song of the South, but he was also close friends with people of color like the actor James Baskett, who he supported when he got an honorary Oscar, and the animator Floyd Norman, who he mentored. Some critics say that Disney's work spreading all over the world is a form of cultural imperialism. They say it pushes American values on other cultures. Whether you agree with these criticisms or not, you can't deny that Walt Disney is a cultural icon. He's been in a lot of movies and TV shows, and he's a really important figure in the history of animation and American pop culture.
He won a ton of awards. He was nominated for 59 Oscars, which is more than anyone else, and he won 22 plus 4 honorary ones. He also won Golden Globes, including the Cecil B. DeMille Award. His Disneyland TV show won an Emmy. A bunch of his movies are in the National Film Registry because they're so important. He has 2 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and so do Mickey Mouse and Disneyland. He's also in the Television Hall of Fame and the California Hall of Fame. In total, he got over 950 awards and honors from all over the world, including the French Legion d'Honneur and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. There's even a minor planet named after him, 4017 Disney. He really made a huge impact on the world.
For sure. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Walt Disney's incredible life and career, it's clear that he changed animation, entertainment, and pop culture in a big way. We've learned about his drive to innovate, his love for powerful stories, and his ability to create characters and experiences that people all over the world love.
Now that you know so much about his creative work and his complicated legacy, here's something to think about. What part of Walt Disney's life and work do you think had the biggest and most lasting impact on the world today?
That's a good question to think about. We hope you learned a lot about the man behind the magic. Now we encourage you to keep exploring Walt Disney's story with this new understanding of his amazing journey and his legacy.
Ever feel like you missed a chapter in recent history? Like a whole bunch happened that you wish you understood better? Today's for you. We're tackling a period that still has shockwaves rippling out, even now, the Arab Spring. And we're going deep based on some seriously in-depth research so you don't have to.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you hear the name, you know it was a big deal, but maybe the details are fuzzy. We're going to fix that. At its heart, the Arab Spring was this massive wave of protests, uprisings, some straight-up rebellions all across the Arab world. Early 2010s is when it really kicked off.
Early 2010s being, to be specific, about December 2010 through December 2012. But that's just the core time frame. Like with any historical event, the roots go way deeper. And the consequences, well, they're still playing out as we speak. I mean, think about Assad finally falling in Syria just last December 2024, or the awful situation in Yemen that seems never ending, all connected to this period.
Absolutely. To untangle all this, we've dug into a ton of articles, overviews, all sorts of sources. The Wikipedia article on the Arab Spring, gotta say, it's a goldmine.
Right.
Super thorough. It covers how the term even came about, the causes behind it, a timeline so you can see how it unfolded, what happened in each country. Even gets into what came after, like the Arab Winter, and even talk of a second Arab Spring. And of course, the whole debate was this true revolution or more about pushing for reforms.
So our mission here is crystal clear. We're extracting the key insights, the stuff you really got to know to grasp this. How did it all start? What were the major turning points? And what's the impact even on us today? And a vital point, there are many ways to interpret the Arab Spring. There's no single right answer on its legacy. Okay, let's back up. Where did that first spark even come from?
It's generally agreed upon that the beginning, the tragic catalyst, was Mohamed Bouazizi in Tunisia, December 2010. This street vendor, he sets himself on fire. Horrible, desperate act, but it was a protest. He was at his wit's end with the corruption, the way officials treated him, like he was nothing.
And it wasn't just him having a bad day, right? This was a symptom of much deeper anger, stuff that had been building up for years.
No question. Our sources lay out several big factors, all intertwined. People were fed up with their governments, especially young folks in the labor unions. Many of these countries, you had authoritarianism, absolute monarchies. Not exactly known for listening to the people. Plus, the demographics were changing. Huge youth population, but not enough opportunities, jobs, a voice in their future. That's a recipe for unrest.
Right, and then layer on top of that the economic struggles, inflation, eating away at their money, widespread poverty, unemployment through the roof. That's going to push people to a breaking point.
You also had this pervasive sense of kleptocracy. Like the people in charge were just lining their pockets, corruption was rampant, no trust in the system. And don't forget the sectarian tensions that already existed, plus that energy crisis back in the 2000s. Heck, even the global financial crisis of 2008 probably played a role, according to the Wikipedia article. It was like all these simmering problems finally boiled over.
All these different pressures, and then that one horrific act, like a match thrown into a powder keg. And out of that chaos came this incredibly powerful, unifying slogan, Ashabu Yordis Kuninam, which translates to, the people want to bring down the regime. That really captures the essence of what they were demanding.
Absolutely. That slogan cut right to the core. It wasn't about tweaking things here and there. People wanted the whole power structure gone.
So Tunisia lights the fuse. But how fast does this spread? It wasn't a contained thing, was it?
Oh, no, not at all. It was like a chain reaction, a domino effect. Starts in Tunisia, then boom, it jumps to Libya, Egypt, Yemen, Syria, Bahrain, all within 2011.
And in that first wave, we saw some pretty major leaders toppled, right?
Yeah, some big names fell. In 2011, you had Zine El Abidine Ben Ali in Tunisia, gone. Muammar Gaddafi in Libya ousted. Hosni Mubarak in Egypt forced out. Then in 2012, Ali Abdullah Saleh of Yemen, he's out too. It's kind of crazy when you think about what happened to each of them afterwards. Ben Ali fled to Saudi Arabia, lived out his days in exile. Gaddafi was killed. Mubarak was actually imprisoned. And Saleh, well, he met a violent end too, killed by Houthi forces in 2017. Each one a very different outcome, which kind of shows how the world was scrambling to react. No unified plan, which contributed to the instability that followed.
Shows you how unpredictable things were. And it wasn't just about those leaders, right?
Yeah.
Lots of other countries saw huge unrest, people taking to the streets.
For sure. You had Morocco, Iraq, Algeria, Lebanon, Jordan, Kuwait, Oman, Sudan, all with sustained protests. Didn't immediately lead to regime change, but definitely showed how deep the discontent ran. And even smaller scale protests popped up in places like Djibouti, Mauritania, Palestine, Saudi Arabia, even the Western Sahara.
Wow, so really widespread. The Wikipedia article mentions these days of rage, often on Fridays after prayers. These weren't just random outbursts, so there was some organization behind it.
That's a good point. The initial spark might be spontaneous, but to keep it going, you need structure. It shows how people were using existing social networks, community ties to mobilize.
Now, something that always comes up when discussing the Arab Spring is technology, specifically social media. What do our sources say about that?
It's undeniable there was a huge spike in social media use across Arab countries during this time. Facebook, Twitter, the whole deal. Except for Libya, interestingly. By April 2011, over 27.7 million people in the Arab world were on Facebook, more than double what it was before.
That's a massive jump. And there was this whole concept of digital democracy going around, like these platforms were giving people power, access to information their governments couldn't control.
Right. Some experts were convinced that social media, especially Facebook, was key. It gave people uncensored news, a way to see what was really happening. That influenced whether they joined the protests, helped with organizing, and even gave them a sense that maybe, just maybe, this could actually work.
But our sources also present this counter-argument, saying maybe it wasn't all Arab-driven. Maybe Western attention played a role in boosting the social media narrative.
Yeah, there's that too. Journalist Jared Keller, he pointed out that while activists were definitely using Facebook to coordinate, the sheer amount of stuff being posted online was likely amplified by people outside the region watching it all unfold. Meanwhile, folks on the ground were often using more traditional methods like texting, email, blogs to organize locally.
Makes you think about the difference between grassroots action and global attention, how they feed into each other. And it sounds like the actual impact of social media is still debated.
Definitely up for debate. Some saw it as this great equalizer, giving everyone a voice, promoting open discussion. Others, like Mark Lynch, were more cautious. He pointed out how social media can create echo chambers where people only hear what confirms their biases. That can drive groups further apart instead of bringing them together. Plus, he pointed out how jarring it was to see hopeful protest images right next to horrific violence, all on the same platform.
It's a reminder that technology is just a tool. It can be used for good or bad, and the results are never simple. Switching gears a bit, the article mentions something surprising about the early stages of these uprisings. The role, or rather the lack of role, of Islamist groups.
Yeah, it kind of goes against what some people might assume later on. Most of these early protests weren't led by big established Islamist groups. Many didn't even have a clear leader at all. Some Islamist groups were hesitant to get involved, and some major religious institutions, like the Salafists and Al-Azhar in Egypt, even opposed the revolution at first. Even the Muslim Brotherhood, their older leaders were dragging their feet, only joined in later because younger members pushed them.
Interesting how that challenges the common narrative. So, you have this wave of protests, some regimes fall, but it doesn't last forever. The Wikipedia article talks about a shift towards conflict, what's called the Arab Winter.
Yeah, by mid to late 2012, things were changing. The initial energy died down, partly because governments started cracking down, sometimes brutally. Pro-government militias got involved, and sadly, sometimes even the protesters themselves turned to violence.
And that's when we see those major, long-lasting conflicts start to erupt.
Exactly. The Syrian civil war, which only ended last year, incredibly devastating. The rise of ISIS and the war in Iraq escalating even further. The crisis in Egypt, Morsi gets overthrown. Libya descending into civil war. And Yemen, well, that crisis just keeps dragging on. It's heartbreaking to see how quickly hopes for a better future turned into so much suffering. Really shows you how fragile progress can be, how strong those in power are.
It's a grim reality. The dream of democratic transitions, it gave way to chaos and violence. And that period, all these ongoing conflicts, that's what people call the Arab Winter. A fitting name, sadly. Reflects the disillusionment, the darkness that followed those early glimmers of hope.
Sums it up perfectly, the feeling that things went backwards, the optimism replaced by hardship and strife.
But the story keeps going, right? The article mentions this idea of a second Arab Spring, sometimes Arab Summer, starting around 2018. What was different about this wave of protests?
Well, from 2018 onwards, you see new protests in Iraq, Sudan, Algeria. People were calling them the Second Arab Spring or Arab Summer. It was like those underlying problems, the things that sparked the first wave, they never went away. People were still demanding change.
And did these later protests accomplish anything?
They did, actually. Both Iraq and Lebanon, their prime ministers stepped down. Sudan and Algeria, their longtime presidents were ousted. That really drives home the point. Those court issues hadn't been addressed, and people weren't going to stay silent. It's like a pattern. Unresolved problems lead to more unrest, again and again.
It's like a cycle. Push for change, things maybe improve a little, but then the old problems resurface. And the article mentions even more protests after this second wave.
Oh, yeah. Algeria, Sudan, Iraq, Lebanon, Egypt, Syria. People are still pushing for change in all those places. Shows you that desire for a better future, it hasn't been extinguished.
Looking at the big picture, it's clear the Arab Spring had very different outcomes depending on the country. Can you summarize some of those differences?
Sure thing. Tunisia and Egypt, they were the ones that saw their leaders kicked out early on and held elections. Though Egypt, things got messy there later on. Then you had the monarchies like Morocco and those in the Persian Gulf. They mostly held on to power, though some did make some reforms, at least on the surface. And tragically, Syria and Libya, well, they basically collapsed. Those conflicts went on for years, incredibly destructive.
And in the aftermath, what are some of the lasting consequences? What issues are still around today?
One big one is sectarianism. The Sunni-Shia divide, it got even worse. Part of that was due to proxy wars like Iran and Saudi Arabia backing different sides in these conflicts. We also saw the rise of Islamist groups trying to create their own states in the chaos, particularly where governments were weak or failing, like in Syria, Iraq, Libya, Yemen. ISIS is the most extreme example of that, brutal and horrifying. But it's important to remember the Sunni-Shia divide isn't something new. It has deep historical and political roots, and these conflicts just made things worse.
The article also talks about the Muslim Brotherhood being suppressed in Egypt and some Gulf countries. Interesting, considering they weren't even leading the charge at first.
Yeah, things shifted. That early period, it was kind of a free-for-all, lots of different groups vying for power. But eventually, those who already held power, or those who grabbed it in the chaos, they clamped down. But there's this interesting argument from Hussein Agha and Robert Malley. They wrote a piece in The New Yorker where they say the biggest divisions now aren't necessarily along Sunni-Shia lines. They say the most intense fighting is actually within the Sunni world. And they suggest that sometimes this sectarian narrative is used as a cover, a way to distract from the real power struggles going on.
That's a thought-provoking perspective.
Yeah.
It challenges the way we usually look at things. The article uses Egypt as an example of how different groups, like the middle class, played a really complicated role in all this.
Yeah, sociologist Gurren Thurborn, he talks about this contradictory role of the middle class in Egypt. They were all for democratic reforms at first, but then they ended up supporting the military, even when the military was cracking down on dissent. Basically, they helped bring back the old regime, just with a new coat of paint.
And it's not just about the big conflicts. The article points out that some countries are still suppressing any kind of opposition even years later, like Bahrain and the UAE.
Absolutely. In Bahrain, even a decade after those 2011 protests, the government is still going after anyone who speaks out. Human rights activists, journalists, Shiite political groups, they're all targets. The UAE 94 case is a prime example. These were peaceful activists, they just wanted democratic reforms, and they were arrested, given unfair trials, thrown in prison. Some are still locked up even after serving their sentences. It's a chilling reminder that the fight for freedom is far from over in many places.
Shows how fragile things are. All those hopes for a more open society, and yet in some places, it backfired terribly. And that leads us to the big question posed by the Wikipedia article itself. Was the Arab Spring a true revolution, or was it more about reform? What do our sources say about that?
That's a question that's still being argued about. There was so much optimism at the start, and that slogan, bread, freedom, and social justice, that definitely sounds revolutionary. But some analysts, like SF Bayat, they argue that these movements lacked a clear ideology, a vision for what would replace the old system. They basically worked within the existing economic framework, the free market stuff. He even came up with the term revolution, this mix of reform and revolution.
The article also points out that some groups, like the April 6 movement in Egypt, they were upfront about wanting reform within the system, not total overthrow.
Exactly. And even in those iconic Tahrir Square protests, some people were surprised when the calls for regime change became so dominant. That wasn't their initial goal. Plus, in places like Egypt, the deep state never really went away. That's the network of power within the bureaucracy, the military, the security forces. They operate in the shadows, and they were able to regain control because the old structures were never fully dismantled.
And then you have the involvement of outside forces, like the United States, which makes the whole pure revolution idea more complicated.
Right. The U.S., initially, they seemed more focused on encouraging gradual reform, not pushing for immediate regime change. They even funded NGOs that were training activists, sometimes specifically on how to promote elections and market-driven reforms. But a lot of Arab governments saw those NGOs as meddling, Western interference.
And after the initial uprising, some argued that there were deliberate efforts to bring back military rule, like a counter-revolution.
Yeah, Marwan Kabalan, he's one who's argued that. He says both regional and global powers have been supporting the return of military dictatorships, the idea being to stabilize things and prevent Islamists from gaining too much power. He even compares it to how Western powers have supported military rule in the region in the past.
It's like this tragic paradox. Trying to achieve radical change through peaceful, democratic means is incredibly difficult, because if you push too hard, those in power will push back, often violently.
Marina Ottaway makes that point really well. She uses the example of Algeria in the early 90s and more recently Egypt. In both cases, they tried to use democratic means to sideline parts of the old elite, and it backfired. They provoked a harsh reaction, leading to more repression.
So wrapping it all up, the Arab Spring, it was a whirlwind. So many factors at play. Social, economic, political. That one horrific act by Mohammed Bouazizi, it set off a chain reaction. Some long-standing dictators fell, technology played a role, but then came the backlash. The Arab Winter, these brutal conflicts that dragged on for years. And the big question, revolution or reform? The answer is probably somewhere in between, and it varies depending on the country.
Exactly. And hopefully this deep dive has given you a clearer understanding of it all. It's a complex topic, but it's essential to grasp because those events are still shaping the world today.
Absolutely. And with all that said, with all the different outcomes, the debates about what it all meant, it really makes you think, doesn't it? What does the Arab Spring tell us about how hard it is to achieve real change in the 21st century? What makes the difference between success and failure for these movements? It's all intertwined. Internal pressure, outside forces, the impact of technology, and the sheer power of those who want to keep things the way they are. We're still witnessing this story unfold.